let's not kid one another. The full stuff doesn't kick in until next week, and so not all of these problems will be solved outright, but they are on a journey and they are making progress.
Thank you, and thanks for the honest report. What drives me is improving the reputation of our county, and policing is amongst one of those priorities. I recently attended the session at Wootton Hall where there was considerable progress that was reported from the officers and the Chief Constable there. As leader of Wellingborough, we've got 19 parishes and one large town. And in my county council division, it's the villages of Wollaston, Grendon, Urchester, Nuston, Bowser, Easton Mordit and the tiny village of Strixton. And they are extremely relieved that the problems with slaughter of animals did not come over to the north, or even, rural south, as we call it. And I think the force and the Chief Constable should be applauded for the excellent arrests that were carried out on Operation Stock. I hope that a percentage of the new recruits that we get specialise in rural communities, because it is really important to us. The new policing model is hugely important as part of local government reform. I think it's a real positive thing. We've got an excellent high-profile Chief Constable, a very proactive Chief Officer team. His position on protecting his officers should be applauded. The use of taser, I think that hasn't been mentioned, but I think it does warrant mention. And my biggest people criticise me for is impatience, Commissioner, and I mention it practically at every meeting, and that is with regard to the integration of police and fire. I want to see more rationalisation of property. It's something that I think is really important, and therefore we can drive down some of the costs and also deliver even more frontline police officers. But I welcome the report, and as I say, let's rebuild the reputation of our county, not only as part of unitary, but as part of delivering first-class police and fire services.
Thank you. It is my intention to provide you with more detail on the journey to purple at the next, but just to kind of give you some highlight, I need to be careful because there's some important negotiations. You're going to kick me if I look like I'm going the wrong place, Paul. There are some developments on our kind of property portfolio to make sure that we're delivering it. So, at the end of the day, we want to make sure as much money goes to the front line as is humanly possible, but at the same time we need fit-for-purpose buildings with equipment in them that are kind of safe to operate, and fire stations that have safe cleaning facilities, if I might put it that way, for all genders is important. So there is some investment that we've got and are making in there. The journey to purple continues at a pace, because actually you're right, if we're not getting our fair of funding nationally, and I think I've talked about it on the fire service is I think it's the bottom but one in terms of its allocation of money nationally in terms of its budget, then the only way that we can deliver better services to make sure that we continue to share. So there are a number of buildings that are continuing. I made the commitment around sharing in Corby. We're looking at procurement and disposal of some police and fire buildings and purchasing one that might be in fit for purpose or building where appropriate. We will be coming forth. I'm not sure we'll completely have it done by December, but we will come forth with some indications of some of the things you can start to expect to see, and also I hope to be able to announce some hires that will be in progress to bolster that, because we've got some particular areas around fleet, IT, some of the work that Helen is doing on finance are working to help sure that we bring them together. But, as we've seen, both police and fire are in the recruitment phase. They both have quite different recruitment, so actually consistency of policies, some work that we're doing with LGSS, MFSS, all these SSs, to make sure that we can bring them together. And in some respects, it's kind of quite hard, actually, in this short but lovely time that we spend together, to give you all of the kind of information. So I will try and make sure we've lots to tell you over the next couple of months as we kind of package it up and deliver on it. Not least that finally it looks like the legislation on complaints is now going to come forth. But I would just take a few moments, if allowed, just to reiterate the performance on the fire service, because not many questions have kind of come their way on that. Their response times are coming down. Only fractionally, but their pump availability is up quite significantly. So the training is now being recorded. So those were the two kind of big bits that were in there. And the fire inspections will probably start, and we'll probably have a new fire inspection before we have a police one. But actually progress is also being made now to make sure, now that we have a more stable financial situation, and this all links into making sure your response time. We will be recruiting firefighters in this financial year to help us in the next financial year. So of the 32, 12 is a genuine expansion of available firefighters, which pushes up our whole time, which gives us greater availability. But also to prepare for retirements and stuff like that, by getting in and recruiting early means that we'll not have some sort of drop off in performance. So it allows us to kind of get in front in terms of our demand. So actually we are really making kind of progress in both in isolation, but also I can honestly say that the working relationship between the two chiefs is also strong to make sure that they kind of look at some of those opportunities. And there are, opportunities in rural. There's a greater proximity of police buildings, so actually the ability to kind of share them means that kind of the people of Northamptonshire will genuinely be safer on the back of that.
I'm glad you mentioned the fire service, because I was going to pick that up, as nobody had really picked that up. But I'm really encouraged both with this new recruitment that you were just mentioning, but also the vehicles that you're procuring, since there was no budget for that when you first took over, and no capital available. So to actually get 7 new vehicles, which I'm sure don't come cheap, is an absolute fantastic achievement.
I can't tell you how hard it was getting the money out of Helen King, I can tell you.
In view of the fact that some of them are, I think, 17 years old, and I think we'll obviously see it takes some time to procure those, but it's a really good and positive start, and I'm sure that will do the whole county a really good service in years to come.
And I also think it is worth giving to particularly in the fire services we're talking about, to compliment on the work they've done over the last few months. I'm here announcing some of these things, but actually it's because also they've had the confidence to know that any money they save goes back into their service and doesn't got siphoned off somewhere else, has given them more confidence. Helen and her team has turned over every single rock to find every penny that is truly possible, some with some quite pleasant surprises. Actually, it's not unfair to say. Enables people to ensure that money is kind of invested back in it. Simple things like we procured better PPE equipment. That's the personal protection for them. That's more suitable also for women. It makes our recruitment easier for us in terms of gender. It adds to that kind of confidence that you kind of feel that you're part of an organisation that's moving in the right direction, which with it comes a kind of a pride and the raising in terms of standard. But you're absolutely right. We won't get the benefit of those vehicles until next year. It takes time for them to kind of come. So we really are trying to make sure that we make those decisions now as early as we can, can, as quickly as we can, so we can genuinely lay the foundation. Because why do we need to do this? Our county continues to grow. You know, there's another 65,000 homes or something to be built over the next 10 years. You know, before we know it, I think it's in 15 or 20 years, we'll have more than 1 million people that are living here. Our services need to continue to make sure that we continue to keep them safe. And as one of the reports, the learnings that we got from the major fires that we've had here, and the use of sort of technology. And there are some, and we're still working on it, so it's, I probably shouldn't say it, but I'm going to anyway, is, you know, as a consequence of some of the work between police and fire, there's an organisation that has kind of, it sounds very odd, makes water wetter, that actually they've got some stuff that actually they've been working on, which actually would make police officers safer as a consequence of acid. So don't underestimate these little things that could have quite profound effects in terms of the safety of both our emergency services, but also that then leads on to a benefit for the public in terms of value for money. So I can honestly say, from a fire point of view, I'm pleasantly surprised from a financial point where we find ourselves. These were not decisions we expected to probably make for another 6 months, and that's testimony to the work that they've done to make sure that, you know, they can help us find the money and invest it back in people.
We're been quite a long while on this item. I think Winston would like to say something, and then we'll move on. Oh, sorry, I've missed a couple there, but, oh yeah, sorry, I have got Richard written down. Yeah, sorry, Winston.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say I'm really pleased, and it's really encouraging when I read the report that we can now buy some new fire engines, because I know they're long overdue, and I've been arguing about this for perhaps the last 3 or 4 years. So I'm really pleased about that. I'm also pleased with the efforts of recruitment and retention of firefighters. And I'm also very pleased, Commissioner, with the way you explained that, you know, some of the numbers that you talk about will be replacing firefighters, but we're also going to be increasing the amount of personnel, which is very good. What I want to see, because I'm really keen that we should protect our firefighters, is quality equipment, breathing apparatus, and also the protective clothing for our firefighters. So as long as we can continue to spend the sort of money that we can raise and get this thing moving forward, I'll be very encouraged and supportive. One of the things I wanted to speak about to do with the police service is that I've read the report, and I do understand that things take time, but what we are seeing in Springboro is more drug dealing and drug taking openly on a daily basis, broad daylight. And also even in Northampton, even right here out the front of County Hall, people are lighting up nasty thing that smells really stink. You know, right, you know, you walk out the front there and people are lighting up and smoking. So, you know, we need to tackle these type of things. And I am really a little bit annoyed about the fact that it seems to be on the increase. And the local, especially in Springboro, the local people and the older ones are complaining continuously about, you know, what's happening in the neighborhood. So if we can get something done about that, we'll be very pleased. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you for your support for the fire service, particularly kind of over the years. I do particularly want to reassure you, because actually we have as part of it, we've done a very detailed audit of our equipment to say what's out of date and what those. There is a very long list that we are. It's quite frightening how out of date some of the stuff actually is. There is a programme, and myself as Chief Fire Officer, the investments in people and vehicles are prudent, we still have left ourselves money to make sure that we do in terms of equipment, because the stuff around kind of, such a long list, I can remember, airbags, I keep saying breathing equipment and stuff like that. So there is going to be an ongoing programme, and we're trying to also make sure that built in the budget is a rolling programme, because what's tended to happen is they got government grants, they bought it, so it got bought in one big go, and so all of a sudden a load of stuff goes out of date at once. So we're also trying to make sure that we create a sustainable one that continues to do that. So thank you, and I think on that. I too share your concerns around drugs, and ironically, low-level drug dealing was one of the objectives that I set for the Chief and subsequently the force. I would kind of ask you, and probably I can give you a more detailed update at the next one. All I can probably give you some reassurance that all I'm going to say is I would expect you to come to me and say, blimey, I didn't expect you to deal with it quite that quickly, because there is something going on that may well address your concerns, if you like, that's kind of going on. There is particularly a programme between now and Christmas, particularly out here, that's already started, but also that's leading to some other stuff between now and Christmas. I will try and get myself in a position that I can give you a more detailed briefing on that. Hopefully, I won't need to, because some of the things you're going to see are going to go. So the bit I can assure you, the force has heard our request and is doing something about it. And I think the bit I would kind of say, that's a good example of the Chief Constable team letting the cops, there's nothing they want to do more than bang up, to use Richard's term, villains. You know, they want to take bad people off of the streets. I would expect to see something happen in that area, particularly around the drug dealing point. But I'm happy to meet with you separately. If we make it about a week or two's time, we might have something else we can talk about, all right?
Richard, you had.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of quick ones, Commissioner. Just echoing Winston's thought. I want a day when I can walk through the town centre without walking into a fog of cannabis smoke. Not that I deliberately use that route, but for me, Commissioner, it just smacks of there are some people in our society that are brazen about their offending behaviour. And, you know, with more frequent police patrols, hopefully, as you get more cops, just in those high visible places in our town centre, we can stop that. But I just want to touch on Taser a little bit. I'm always a little bit concerned when we make use of force policy decisions following the death of an officer. And Andy Harper's death, we all mourn and we all feel it. And especially that the cop was killed no more than half a mile from where I lived when I was serving in the Thames Valley. But I was pleased, as I heard the headline, to follow up on it and find out that the decision to train more officers in Taser is a direct result as looking at the threats that they are facing rather than an emotive decision to use or arm our cops with Taser solely on the back of losing one of our colleagues. So I'm comforted with that, and I'm grateful that the Chief, the way that came across, that it was very much unconnected with Andy Harper's death and more about the threats that his cops and the public are facing. What did concern me a little bit is that during the interview he talked, and I'm paraphrasing this, and please forgive me if I've got it wrong, that he was going to sacrifice some of the recruitment of cops to getting better equipment. That does concern me, because that we are now not going to recruit as many cops because he needs to pay for the training in Taser. Can you just reassure, because that was said on television, that that isn't the case, that we're still getting the cops we want, and the money to increase Taser is coming from some other budget? Thank you.
There's two parts of that. One, I can reassure you, so before any announcement was made on Taser, Chief Constable came to see me. We had a sensible chat about it, and I support the decision wholeheartedly. It's also worth just to reassure you to kind of go back in time. One of the things is violence against police officers continue to be on the rise. Also, you know, we we will always have finite resources. We would like to double crew wherever possible, but actually if the original philosophy, and if I might say, don't take the wrong way, Richard, in your time, if you like, was taser was very much about an alternative to kind of lethal force. The debate has kind of moved on, that it's actually seen more as personal protection rather than a thing, because actually I think it's not lost on a lot of people that that the respect police officers enjoyed, a number of years ago isn't quite in the same way. And particularly if you've got, a police officer by themselves in potentially a dangerous situation. You only need to see, it's on YouTube, the guy with the video, the video on YouTube where he'd actually got a machete and there was just 2 police officers. Thankfully, I had provided money under the previous Chief Constable to increase taser, and ironically we were having the debate at that time some 3 years ago now, that we were saying, well actually it may well be that this debate that we're having about how far up in terms of whether taser people want it will be a quaint debate and we hope that this is a discussion that we're wrong on. Sadly, it turned out to be quite true. It is optional. It's on the basis of, you want to do it. And perhaps a good example and a bellwether for me, some of you saw the 999 programme. I went out on patrol not so long ago with some police officers, and one of the ladies on there who actually said on the show that she didn't think she would, and she'd said actually, having seen what's going on lately and the escalation, she had changed her perspective. So I think actually the chief's quite in time with his own staff in terms of feedback. Yes, I'm not saying that, did it pull forward or influence, what had happened sadly in the Andy Harper case. But no, it was part of a longer term kind of consideration. I think I don't have the quote in front of me, I think the chief he would rather have better protected police officers and would be prepared to sacrifice. He's not actually sacrificing. That wasn't something we had agreed, but do you know what? In some respects, if that's a choice, that may be one we would need to. That's not one we've agreed. We've agreed some targets together and do it. And to be fair, that point is thankfully null and void because of the leadership shown by the Chief Constable in Northamptonshire. The Home Secretaries came to the party and now provided money to do it. We've still got to do some ourselves, but actually that reduces the burden on Northamptonshire to a much more manageable level over the next few years. Just as a reassurance to the public, taser is very rarely used, but it does have quite a calming effect on people when they do it. Even more so, because there are 2 phases to it. There is obviously the actual firing of the barbs, but prior to that there is also the little red dot. We have the latest one, just to anyone who's thinking of getting into trouble, that has 2 shots. So some think if they fired one and missed you, well guess what, they've still got another shot. In addition to that, they also have a little red dot. Where those red dots have been used, people have tended to calm down very, very quickly. And that's not meant in a menacing, scary way. It just merely means that there are some people who may be high on drugs, or had too much alcohol, who need that moment to reflect, and that does help it. Thankfully, it's very rarely used. I also want to reassure you that we're doing some work both with additional training, also with mental health groups to make sure there's an understanding and that we actually carry on with the acceptance that we've got in the public. Northamptonshire polices by consent. The legitimacy of the public will be there. I can honestly tell you I've had the odd negative comment, but by far the phenomenal majority have supported this decision.
I think we need to, if you could just quick question, quick answer if we could on this one, Ian.
It's a quick comment actually. Councillor Griffiths earlier on said about writing to the Prime Minister on behalf of this committee. Could we put that as a formal action point from this meeting?
Yeah, everyone happy with it? And that was on
funding, asking
the fair
about
funding.
Fair funding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone happy with that?
Yeah,
yes, I'm sure. Yeah,
okay,
that's
thank
fine.
you. That's all it was. Thank you.
Absolutely. In that case, then, if we can move on to, have we got anything else to do on that, James, or we just note the report? Yeah. To the recruitment, retention and sickness report, page 39, seems actually quite not quite so black. So I thought,
Sorry, Charles, wouldn't we say something on the performance data
oh right, sorry. Is that
on page 29?
okay? Right, okay. We haven't mentioned that.
Bear with me. First of all, obviously, useful, very useful information. I do think there's scope for this to be further enhanced. Looking at it, 3 elements. First of all, in the absolute numbers, we've got the absolute numbers in here. We've got the trends largely within the narrative. The comparisons are really helpful where, for example, you've got it in a knife crime. You've got the comparison against the MSG. I think if that could be done where possible throughout, that'd be really helpful. Because the key thing is we're not expecting, it is all about trends. We're not expecting overnight solutions in any of these areas. That'd be one element to it. Second element to it would be it's quite focused on absolute numbers, which are important from understanding how successful we're being in crime prevention, but also in the second pillar, your mission on the resolution of crimes. There's not a lot in here. Now, the way I'm not trying to be prescriptive in this, but it may well be that a more graphical format might help to get that information across. And the third point I would just have is something on total level of crimes, because there's always the risk that as the police focus heavily on the priority areas, that those areas which are not priority but still nevertheless very important get missed out. So that would be my suggestions for enhancing this. First of all, I guess the rest of the panel, would they be supportive of that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think, any extra information that helps us see the trends would, I think, be most welcome, because it's, otherwise it's just snapshot in time, and it shows, if it's going up, down, or whatever. And particularly with the burglary, I'm, very encouraged with the results you'll get, the figures on the burglary side.
Very much welcome. This will continue to be a kind of an iterative process as we kind of learn. I obviously want to provide the panel with as much information as possible, but also with it staying within our respective kind of remits in terms of, I don't want to unnecessarily alarm the public in terms of some stats that you might see. So, for instance, rape and investigation numbers, actually we have no evidence that rape has gone up in the county, but actually the reporting has gone up as a consequence of kind of confidence report. So I will, and I'll take it, and we'll continue to involve as we have now filled that position. We've got an analyst starting with us to make sure that we can provide a more kind of comprehensive. So if you like, we will, I don't want anyone to take that to mean that I'm not going to provide it. That's not what I'm saying with you, and I completely get it, because also we're having exactly the same conversations. But I also am conscious that actually I need to tread carefully, because actually I want to make sure that I don't alarm the public with some of the stuff that I do. So I will share. That may mean some of it is confidential briefings, but I'm happy to continue to work and develop on that with you.
Yeah.
And on your comment on that, I think you're quite right. Sometimes the narrative to help understand the numbers is vital. But the other element to it as well is, whereas mentioned those comparative numbers against our MSG or national, then that lets people see whether it is a local issue or whether it's a wider issue.
If the chief was here, he'd say, well, actually, and I am always interested in the MSG, but for me too, if you listen to our accountabilities, to be honest, sometimes I do remind them, I don't care if it's getting worse somewhere else, it just better bloody get here, but here, if you know what I mean. But yes, I'm absolutely take it on board. We're trying to find the right way of giving you enough enhanced public confidence, but you feel that you're getting what you need from us, so we'll continue to work on that.
Thank you very much. Okay, so if we can go on to the sickness and retention recruitment.
Madam Chairman, today's report follows a previous request from the panel for more information relating to police officer recruitment, retention and sickness. Obviously, police officer retention continues to be recruitment seems to be a moving feast, but depending on what announcement I get from the government on a respective day. But the other two, I think we can do. The bits I would kind of highlight to you, we provided a brief overview on each area. And it's worth reflecting on the fact that despite the challenges our officers face each and every day, nationally, policing has a retention rate of 94%, which is 11% higher than the UK workforce one-year retention rate. I'm also reassured by the turnover of officers from Northamptonshire Police, which is within normal business parameters and allows the recruitment for new staff, skills and expertise for the force. Policing is not a normal job. However, through the investment in new technology, training assistance, we're now providing our officers and staff with the support and advice to help improve how they as an organisation manage teams and respond to individual needs. It's important to remember that operational policing is the responsibility of the Chief Constable, but the investment, support and I've given him will hopefully deliver long-term benefits to our workforce. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Just first of all, I don't know whether we could get some sort of comparison with other areas, because obviously I know we've been saying about, you know, how our finances are a lot poorer than we would hope compared to other areas, and it would be quite useful to see if they are, I know obviously with this new money that's going to spread across the country, but in general, whether, say, sickness and other things are comparable to other places or better or worse.
Her Majesty's Inspector of Government, Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, Fire and Rescue Service, HMICFRS for short, do a what's the term? You know they do the... Yeah, thank you. They do value for money indicators across all of the respective forces. And I know my colleague on the thing is a bit of an expert in probably could, Mrs. Shields could do us a presentation on it. There is a slight issue with those. Those are the best, but the problem is each force does put different bits in different pockets, and so actually cross-comparison across forces is more challenging. I would say that will only continue to improve though, because actually, obviously, Home Office and all that want to make sure that the use of money and the outcomes continues to be something that is monitored. We will look at how we do it, because obviously it's part of our validation from my holding the Chief to account to make sure that they are doing it. I'm happy to share those. In the short term, the value for money ones are available and easy, and they may, if you know, we can happily provide them, and they might provoke some questions for you to go, I want you to look in a particular area, rather than me putting a lot of work into some reports and you going, well, actually wasn't what we wanted. So I'm happy to be guided by you on how we might work on that.
I think that would perhaps be useful. We don't want you to have to, you know, spend a lot of time on it. If that information is available, you know, a link to that would be useful. Yes, Mrs. Shields.
Yes, Commissioner, I was going to ask you actually on a sickness. Now, as you've seen, the benchmarking for the public sector is 8 days per full-time equivalent. Now, the force is currently averaging 9.37. Police officers are 8.18 days and police staff 11.04. Now, I have read the subsequent paragraph regarding physical and psychological illness, etc. How confident are you that this new use of QLI, key business intelligence software that is being implemented, is actually going to reduce the numbers of sickness? Because this is only an application. Aren't you doing, as a matter of course, spot check? For instance, I remember when I used to work for local authority, I had a ligament torn on one of my knees, and I had my whole legs in a plaster. And suddenly I had a bang on the door, and it was an officer from the council checking that I had actually my sickness was valid, and I was pleased about that, because I think there's a lot of people who use sickness as a way of not doing any work. So I would like to know what the efficacy of the QLI key and spot check on staff.
Just for the record, it's pronounced click. I kept calling it something else, but it's pronounced click. All of this really is about management and supervision, really. Click is a tool to enable them to do it. So in other words, it would enable us to more easily identify that if somebody requests a day off and doesn't get it, and then they are sick that day, it more easily enables the force to identify. You know, it's worth bearing in mind now. The staff numbers are up. We have over 2,000 people in the organisation. One of the things that I mentioned previously, and that's something Richard asked me around supervision. Our supervisory training and support for supervisors, sergeants, and leaders in the organisation to make sure they actively manage. Also, as you have noted, we have a new head of HR, and actually are putting in some practices to make sure, and this is about supporting our staff. So one of the things that we need to make sure that we do is, because we were not, or the force was not managing, as you can see from some of these numbers, its health and well-being as well as it might, then actually the excessive use of overtime because of lack of resource doesn't mean that we were running some of our people kind of in the ground, which then kind of pushes up. So some of those, as you'll see, some of these numbers are now actually starting to come down, and also by removing also, if people want to genuinely leave and long-term sick, it's great. Also, more innovative ways. You know, we have our initial investigation team, so if somebody actually cannot go out because of physical and their mind is still working, that we are kind of better using those. So actually that's better for their well-being, it's better value for money for the public. But actually, going to your point about that mean old council who stopped round to check that you had done that, actually we're not doing it from that respect, but actually you would expect a call from your supervisor to say, are you all right? Is there anything you need? You know, by the very definition of what we ask them to do, they see quite terrible and damaging kind of things, and the psychological effects of that can continue to kind of, for some it can be it's a trigger, sometimes it's a major event, sometimes it can be the succession of it. We need to genuinely kind of take better care of our people, and there's an important balance. You know, our provision that we provide for the force provides for its people is one thing. They aren't the NHS though, so there's that fine line in trying to make sure that we support our people back to work as quickly as possible, but also if they wish to move on and do something else, that we kind of support and or enable them to do that. And of course, as you know, all of these things cost money. One of the things that, while we're talking about comparisons between different forces, Durham has continually, because it's a lot better funded than Northampton, I think it's 130, is it £140, did I mention that, per resident compared to our measly 102. Well, funny enough, and that's what grates with you when HMIC says, and they're a great force. Boy, could we be a hell of a lot better with the £13 million extra that we would have if we funded at the rate. They have a, if you want to leave, they help you on their way and sign them off and use that money accordingly. That does help you in terms of moving some of those ones on. And I say what I'm about to say now doesn't mean I'm casting aspersions against any level of management in Northamptonshire Police. But if you've got some underperforming leaders in your organisation and you are a small and leaner organisation, you can't do like you could in the Met or West Midlands or Greater Manchester, where you can park them on a project because there's a percentage of your, you know, your leadership team, they're quite small. When you've got a small team, in Northamptonshire, everyone has to perform for us to be an excellent organisation. And I think that we're now moving in terms of performance management, but that is to support our people. So in the first instance, it's give support to them and then make sure that if they're not, you know, they're not utilising that support, then we kind of give them the opportunity to go and do something else.
Yeah, just to say, we put a lot of pressure on our police and emergency services, don't we? And we only got to read the graphic detail in the domestic abuse strategy to see some of the awful examples. Morale is really important, that we keep morale up, and I can imagine the frustration of well-trained Met police officers safeguarding protesters in London at the moment when they'd much rather be tackling knife crime and the serious crime that exists in our capital.
Just interrupting you, Northamptonshire Police doing an operation with the Met that is probably slowed down as a consequence of that right now, related to some other subject we might have been talking around earlier, i.e. drugs, that we would be making more progress now if those protests weren't there, because you're right, that means a bunch of resource has to be redirected towards someone else, something else.
Yeah, but just to finish, I think there's some excellent examples of where police officers are really engaging well with the community and community groups now, and I think that also increases the morale of our officers. So I fully support the recommendation in 5.1, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. You know, sickness has always been a challenge, especially in the world of policing. But I would suggest that most, well, in fact, all cops, all hard-working cops and PSSOs, police staff, and the feds themselves will always want a robust system when it comes down to managing sickness. I think within the culture of policing, I remember certain officers being referred to as sick note as a nickname because of their absence. Now that may be cruel and something from the 80s and 90s, but nevertheless it tells you the psychology of police officers when it comes down to everybody should be pulling their weight. What worries me, Commissioner, and does worry me, is the fact that we play on the emotive part of what a cop does and the sickness related to those difficult to a robust system where home visits, all right, we did home visits. I'm not sure whether that's been outlawed, but home visits were important to actually ensure that the welfare of the cop, but also ensuring that any officer that may be not that well would be challenged. So are you happy that we have got the right balance? From here, there doesn't seem to be very much robustness, a lot of caring, and we all understand that. But remember, even our own staff want a robust process to making sure that only those who are sick actually are taking time off to recover. Thank you.
Am I happy? I'm never happy in my job. I'm only ever content. At this moment in time, I am content that the force is making progress in this area. Is it where it needs to be yet? No. As far as I'm concerned, these levels are still too high, and particularly in some particular cohorts. I'm aware of work that's kind of being done in there. But like I said, it kind of needs to come in two phases. It needs to make sure that we've got the support in place first, and actually we're doing that. And I suppose, in other words, it's the bit beyond it. You know, I was walking across to my car the other day, and some woman who I'd never met stopped me, and she asked, this was on the police compound, it's got a connotation in that I didn't mean to have there, on a police compound, who happened to kind of say, I just wanted to say, with yourself and the new chief and the working relationship, it's now a joy to come to work again. So actually on that bit, I genuinely believe, and I meet people that kind of go, actually they feel like the force is regaining its mojo. And so actually that's kind of the first stage of it. And so some of these stuff that's kind of going, cops, as you've said previously, cops join to take villains off the street. Actually enabling them to robustly enforce is part of that. Doesn't mean that they're not part of a caring profession. Chief is important to point out. If you don't want to be here, he's got, you know, he'll happily help you. Is it a red slip? I can't remember what there's a particular one. If you don't want to be here, he'll help you and sign the paperwork as well. You need kind of committed individuals. But actually, it's also, you're right, for those that are working their butts off, if I might use that term, then actually they want to know that actually you can't skive and get away with it. And I think that message is very clearly there. Has that reached all parts of the organisation yet? No, but I think you've got a lot of very talented individuals, and this chief is doing more to unlock that, chief officer team is doing more to unlock that potential than I've seen for quite some time.
Right, panel, happy to note that report, okay? Moving on to policing budget update report. Would you like to speak to that, Stephen?
Madam
or is it
Chairman.
Helen?
Oops, I am on.
Or is it Helen?
Yes, Madam Chairman, today's report is based on 7 months of data. Boy, time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it? 7 months. And is subject to change. However, at this early stage in the year, it's forecast that the total police budget of 137.3 million, 314 million, will be balanced. Although the force are forecasting an overspend of 700,000. My office and delivery budgets, enabling services, capital finance costs are forecast to underspend, which we expect to offset the force's overspend. In addition to this, the increase I hoped in police office establishment from 1227 to 310 as part of the budget and preset for this year is currently on schedule, and I will of course provide updates to the panel at future meetings. A great deal of work is being done by both the force and the OFPCC to monitor spending and ensure that strict budgetary controls are maintained. The report's a great deal of detail, and I will be more than happy for Helen to answer all. For myself and Helen to answer any questions.
Helen, did you want to?
I think the only thing I just wanted to add to that, if that's okay, is at the last meeting I mentioned to the panel that none of the audits had started, none of the external audits. We haven't got any signed off or any finalised yet, but we have a police audit part way through, and we do have the fire audit that has started. So I'm hoping that that's a signal for all of us in Northamptonshire that we might be able to get those done soon.
And Helen, for everyone's benefit, would you just be explicit as to why our audits all can't be complete for the records, please? Sorry, but I think some are councillors, but some are independent members and might not be aware, so I would be grateful for you.
So for the record, all of our draft accounts for the 3 organisations, the PFCC group, the Chief Constable and Fire, were put on publicly available and closed by the 31st of May, in line with the requirements. Unfortunately, our audit colleagues were unable to resource throughout Northamptonshire undertaking those audits. They've also found, from their words, not mine, they've also found that they've been unable to do the work on the pension fund as well, because the NCC audit is still ongoing from the previous year. So it's through no fault of our own. It's through no fault of our own.
I think this is a general problem, and I think it's quite a worry from your point of view, from council's point of view, that there is that lack of capacity from, I believe, a new company. I think it's possibly a national concern, and whether that, I presume through that the joint independent audit committee will probably be a good, when we get to that report, something that we can bring up. But I think it is a real concern. I just want to ask about the early intervention. Was sort of we had a sort of slow start on it, and we had some sort of savings as a result. But I just wondered whether that's impinging on that work, and also that the government has put out some quite sort of strong statements recently about supporting youth work, and whether, and I think providing money, whether that is something that can be utilised.
I'll start, if that's okay. In terms of the grant announcements, in terms of the supporting youth work, Nikki and Stephen were very successful in getting £600,000 across an 18-month period awarded to Northamptonshire, and that's joint working. I won't go into the detail because I'll get it wrong, but that's joint working. Thank you. That's joint working across the partners on serious youth violence, and that's working. We're in the last year of that now. In terms of the new grant proposals, we've not got that level of detail out yet, but yes, you're quite right, Chair. There's quite a lot of opportunities there that I would hope that we might be able to seek funding for, or at least try to seek funding for.
Sorry, the late start on the early intervention, has that sort of had any knock-on effects?
I'll answer that one. If anything, we have carried, if you like, I apportioned budget to it and we've moved it over. Some of the things we can help to, when I talk about balancing the budget, means that, if you like, the money slid along into another year. Sometimes I might borrow it to put it back in a future year. If, for instance, the chief came to me and I hadn't got the money for, I use Taser as an example, I might borrow it and give it myself back in another year. But the money hasn't gone away and continues to slide. It's probably also a timely moment for a quick plug for youth service. Where are you on the youth service, Nikki?
On the youth service, we have appointed to 5 of the posts already. We're trying to align all of their start dates for the beginning of December, because that's the date that the manager is able to start with us, following his release from Cambridgeshire County Council. The remaining posts are all going out to advert again. I think for some of them are out now. We're just working with HR on the trainee posts, because we need to revisit the grade of them. In terms of the ACE support team, we've now got all of the staff in place, and we have actually negotiated a slightly different way of operating, so that we are linking them much more closely to the Police Serve programme, so that we can give that family support input to the families engaged with the Serve programme, but also pick up those who are referred to Serve and actually aren't appropriate to actually go into that level of intervention, so we can put an earlier response in place.
Does everyone know what Serve is?
I do, but I'm sure it would be useful for others to explain that.
It's a community, because I haven't got my thing on today. It's a community initiative to reduce violence. Some of you may have heard of it. It was based on a model that worked in kind of Boston and Glasgow that significantly reduced. These are available to you for free, but everyone else has to pay for them. It's really about reducing gangs. Some of you may have seen it. We had Stephen Lawrence's brother came up and supported it last week in terms of, and this is where we talk to young school children about in gangs. At the call-in, there is a whole programme around it, and the ACE workers have been very useful in kind of engaging with families, stopping these kids going on that pathway to crime. They've also been helpful in terms of, there was, you mentioned domestic violence earlier on. There was one of the couples that was highlighted in there, and they intervened to help the family that stopped it escalating. So actually we're already starting, I think the ACE caseworkers already dealt with, is it like 500 cases so far in the first 6 months of this year?
I think you're confusing the figures with Serve.
Right, so
500 referrals to Serve.
Okay. I like the number 500 obviously too much, I was to say. So we are making progress, but also more work needs to be done for us now as we put them in place to blend those services closer together as they kind of all come on stream. I'm not looking at my Labour friend, but I was going to say I was very pleased to see and the Labour Party policy around more youth workers, if you like, and youth ones as a policy. So we'll already be slightly in front of that. I'm hedging my bets depending on what government comes in. You see, I'll get my money from government either way.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shields.
I think the few questions I need to address is to you, Helen. I'm looking at the forecast downturn, and specifically the budget managed by the force as opposed to the office of the commissioner, which I think is very good, the saving that you have made. However, you show on the overspend on corporate budget that you are looking, there's a shortfall against this target of 194K for saving, which is not yet achieved, and you're hoping that this will be delivered by the Chief Constable. What happens if this is not forthcoming? How are you going to actually fund these shortfalls? That's question number one. Question number two is the devolved budget, the 646. Now, you said that the cause of this extra overspend is unbudgeted staff costs, specialist investigation, and increase of ICT costs. But surely all of this would have been into the action plan, and you should have known about this cost. And then the last one is the collaboration budget, 226. Now, you say again that this increase costs MFSS 120K. You said the inability to realize efficiency and onboard other partners while fusion is implemented. So how confident are you to realize those efficiency savings from the MFSS?
Thank you. I'll start with the first one, if that's okay. So, yes, the force was supposed to, we'd given them a savings target this year of 614,000. They have, at this point in time, identified and put in place all but £194,000 worth of them, okay? Yeah. In that budget head, there's a few other budgets that offset that figure, which is why we end up with 152. Yes, they will keep working at trying to identify savings between this and the end of the financial year. If they don't hit that, and if their bottom line still overspends, then that is a conversation for the Chief Constable to have with the Commissioner about whether the Commissioner is prepared to fund that shortfall or if he wishes to take action in the following year. So they would have that conversation. In terms of the second one, about the devolved budgets, I would say, yes, I think some of them should have been better known, understood and built into the budget. The area I look at there is ICT costs. The Deputy Chief Constable, myself and our office are particularly bothered with how the ICT costs have been picked up or haven't been identified fully enough. And we've agreed to do a bit of a 100% check on all of the contracts in that particular area together, the Deputy Chief Constable and myself going through. There has also been an impact from increased agile working, which is great, but more than was anticipated. So the Deputy Chief Constable is keeping a really tight look on ICT costs. We want to get that budget as right as possible for next year. We want to make sure all business change highlights ICT costs. We want to make sure when there's old systems that should be switched off, that they are being switched off, that they're not paying for contracts that they shouldn't have. So we're going to do a full piece of work on that one.
When Helen says there's extra costs for Agile, what does she mean? So, if you like, our data usage charges have shot up, which is a negative for the budget, but is a positive for visibility because it means they are out and about and they're using their devices rather than sat in things. So we also need to have a look at them, and that's why the conversation needs to occur between me and the Chief Constable is, do you know what? It sounds very odd what I'm going to say. That's a good overspend, and I'm going to be relaxed about that because that means the public are getting a better service. And also, we do know from our data now where they're out and where they've been. So actually, in addition to their spatial, we can actually see with all the devices where they've been. So actually, when someone says, I don't see anyone, I can actually, if you say there's no one been in Springboroughs, can you please show me who's been in Springboroughs and how much time they've spent there?
Helen, to come back to question number 2,
Yeah.
did you, on the devolved budget, did you do a zero-based budget?
I didn't do the forces budget last year, but I did scrutinise and challenge them on the budget and how they prepared it. Yes, they did do zero base on a lot of areas. I have been led to believe that a bit more detail had been done on the zero base on the ICT, but clearly there were a number of areas that they did not highlight. They didn't look across at the change programmes and see how they were impacting on the ICT budget. So I can assure you that we most certainly are doing a total zero base for 2021. In terms of the other areas in the devolved budgets that you highlighted, Mrs Shields, the specialist operational areas and the unbudgeted posts, they weren't planned at the beginning of the year. They are specific to certain operational things that are going on and that are required at this point in time on the forces budget. So they weren't things that were foreseen, and they are more than what the operational contingency that the Deputy Chief Constable has at his fingertips to use on those areas. So that's why they're in there.
Does it mean that in the future, these costs that was unexpected, that will carry on to be an item?
I would hope that those specific areas would go at some time, Mrs Shields, because they would be related to operational policing for a particular event, case, incident, and we would hope that they would drop out at some point.
Yeah, what this is that there are some sensitive cases that are ongoing that have not come to fruition yet, that cost additional money. Sadly, policing is not linear. If you have a significant murder case, or if you have significant, I'm trying not to give away the bits. I was trying to, but be assured we are aware of the financial implications of those major cases. At the end of the day, that doesn't. We need to leave the chief unfettered to bring justice, and we will deal with the financial kind of implications later. But normally, as we go along, we make more money available, and that's what reserves are there for, and the emergency fund. At the end of the day, I'd rather spend a little bit more money to get more justice, particularly in some cases that we'll probably all read about at some point.
Helen, do you want to do the third question?
I do, yes, thank you very much, Chair. So in relation to the third question, in terms of collaboration, the vast majority of that overspent area is unfortunately the multi-force shared services area. You asked me how confident am I that they will realise either the efficiencies or other partners onboarding, which is bringing down the costs. Not at all, I'm afraid, is the answer that I will give to you, Mrs Shields. We have been increasingly concerned about the year-on-year increase in costs from the multi-force shared services area. Our Joint Independent Audit Committee, we do an update to them every single meeting because they share our concern, not only on the costs, in terms of the implementation of the upgrade that happened in April and the service delivery, and in terms of how it operates on the business as usual and the services it provides. It is most certainly less than we require, and we are looking at that in a lot of detail. So unfortunately, I do not believe that MFSS budget will manage to hit, to balance within budget at this year end, Mrs Shields. And all partners are similarly concerned.
And I'd probably just add to that, we've got, I think I'm coming out. Are you? Thank you. We have, led by Paul, an independent audit to go on MFSS. This is a multi-force shared services is a shared function around payroll, finance, HR that was originally, I think, how many years ago was it? It was done with Cheshire. 7 years ago. It now has Nottinghamshire and CNC. We are at a critical moment. The simplest I could say, I wouldn't put the fire service in it at this moment in time. So we have a fit for purpose review because we now have 2 services. We will deliver a fit for purpose solution that might be within it, that might not be that, but Paul and a comprehensive team is looking for us to make the right decision. I think it's not unfair to say we've done what we can from an investment point to make it work. We now determined, are we satisfied that it can be made to work, or what are the alternatives? So led by Paul as a big team working in conjunction with the force for us to determine what that's going to look like. And given its important nature, we'll come and brief you on it at an appropriate time in the future.
Thank you. I'm glad you're on top of that, because I know it's been a worry from when I visited the Joint Independent Audit Committee. So, any other... Oh, yeah, sorry, Robert, I missed you earlier.
Sure, just a quick one on the presentation side. One of the things I was doing, running through these numbers, was digging out past papers, trying to put the variance numbers in context, which I find when we get onto the fire paper later on, it's got that there, and it really helps, I think, to understand how big a difference these are.
It does. Fire's slightly different because, of course, and I'm happy to provide whatever level of detail the Commissioner would like me to provide. In terms of policing, the PFCC holds the Chief Constable to account. So our internal accountability board meetings, when we look at budget monitoring on the force, we look at it in a lot of detail. We look at it in at least as much detail as we do on fire. And Stephen goes through all of those lines in detail with the Chief Constable, challenging him on his spend, etc. In terms of fire, because the Chief Fire Officer is not a separate organisation, if you like, Stephen is, I bring the report in detail here on fire because this is the only place that he gets to share it. Whilst we go through it at the accountability board, this is the formal place for sharing it. So I'm happy to have that conversation and to whatever level of detail you would require.
I think it's, so if we look at some of these numbers, you know, you can go, that looks like a big number, but is it a big number in the context of a big pool, or is it a big number in the context of a little pool? I think that it's as simple as that.
I'm happy to look at presentation and options. We have the information, I just want to make sure we have a fair balance.
Certainly, thank you.
But you're absolutely right. You know, we are looking at, in the end, a balanced budget, but even of the forces 700,000 over on a budget of 130 plus million, what is that? I think it's 0.5% variation. You're absolutely right. An overspend is not something that gives me joy or happiness, but actually I know lots of organisations in Northamptonshire, actually around the world, who would be very happy with a 0.5% deviation in terms of what their budget financing kind of looks like. But be assured, and that's what we're here for. You want to know how we hold the force to account to make sure that we're driving those numbers to the appropriate level. And you know what? Look, some of them should have been identified. And actually, part of the reason that we've lent Helen to, at the moment, you know, she manages, if you like, she owns the totality, but she's not responsible for theirs, although she is at this moment in time. So it's a slight confusion inside why she says she did or did not, if you know what I mean, to make sure we've got a young man in there and that team is coming up to speed, but need expertise to make sure that it kind of raise it up. Because in some respects, what actually happened a couple of years ago, Northamptonshire Police probably, in the desire to hold up the number of frontline police officers, decimated its back office and probably made some decisions. MFSS is perhaps a good example, where it went into some shared services that were supposed to save it some money, haven't delivered on it, and actually have meant that they've spent money that they didn't get the benefit of it, and you've actually had to deploy, if you like, frontline police officers to back office to solve some of those things. So sometimes I don't share all that detail, but those are the things that we are very carefully going through to make sure that we, forensically ensure that we're doing it. But I don't want to pretend that I'm happy with 700,000, if you know what I mean. But you're absolutely right. As a percentage, 700,000 here is 0.5%. 700,000 on the 22 million is a whole big issue, if you like, on the fire budget. So you're absolutely right. And I think we'll have a look at, see what we can do in percentage terms to give you some insight on that, yes.
Thank you. Martin, you had a question.
Just to very quickly, going back to the audit situation, the delay in achieving unqualified accounts in the districts and boroughs, and obviously at county council as well, has caused us all a lot of concern. Have you received the same assurances as we have from Ernst & Young that this won't happen again next year, because, I mean, it's a really important year, especially for local government reorganisation.
I would hope that we've received the same assurances. John Beckelegg, the chair of the Joint Internal Audit Committee, will be presenting in a moment. I can assure you that our committee have been extremely robust with the external auditors on a number of occasions, and they have...
I must feel sorry for them.
They have definitely challenged him, and he has given us assurances that they have got more resources in place. Do I 100% believe that it won't happen again next year? I think I'll just reserve judgment on that until we've finished the end of the audit process this year, because what I am finding from the very early work that they have started is they're also going into a lot more depth and a lot more detail and a lot more sample testing and a lot more checking and querying pensions, if you like, a lot more than the previous auditors were. It might just because they're a brand new audit firm and they're coming in to just understand, but I'll reserve judgment. But he has given us assurances at the Internal Audit Committee, but I think he will continue to be challenged on those assurances until such time as we do receive the satisfactory service.
Okay, the panel happy to note that report? Oh, sorry, James.
No, so, and in addition to that, I take it that the panel as a whole is saying that it wishes to see a greater level of detail in the future force budget monitoring reports comparable with that in the fire monitoring report. So translating Mr Mahaffy's point into a recommendation from the panel as a whole.
So it's a comparable data as opposed to more granular data.
Yeah.
So I would probably, yeah, I agree with you. James, I don't agree with you.
It's having the data to compare to rather
Right.
than being more granular on the actual expenditure lines.
So perhaps the budget next to it, so we could see how material it is next to the budget. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. So if we can then move on to the fire budget.
Okay. As this report sets out, there is a forecast underspend of 378,000 on the NCFRA budget. This underspend was mainly arisen from good financial housekeeping, additional local business rates, and a Section 31 grant, which is £337,000 above what is included in the budget and the governance transfer business case, as business rates information was finalised after setting of the 1921 pre-September budget. As members will know, this is the first full year of Northamptonshire Commissioner Fire and Rescue Authority, following the governance transfer on the 1st of January of this year. Investing in the service and establishing long-term financial sustainability are our key priorities for the service, and a projected underspend is a testament to the work that we have undertaken. Looking forward, we are recruiting new firefighters, purchasing new vehicles and new kit, which will help to enhance and improve the service that we can deliver. This is the beginning of a brighter future for the service, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Could you perhaps just explain a little bit, first of all, what a Section 31 grant is?
It's the Home Office grant, which is associated with the local element of the business rates as well. So it's looking across at local business rates, both from the Home Office grant and from the local side. It all comes together.
Okay, well, as we've said before, really encouraging news on the whole time and retained firefighters being recruited, as well as the new vehicles. Is there any risk in taking on those extra vehicles before the capital programme has really been finalised?
When we set the budget at the beginning of this year, we did build in terms of financial risk, we did build in estimates for a capital programme for fleet, an estimate over estates and an estimate over operational equipment. But the Commissioner did say at that stage, we need to see your strategies before we can actually invest in all of those. Those strategies, we've seen some early drafts and they've gone back for a little bit of tweaking in some areas. As regards to vehicles, because they do have such a lead time, the Commissioner was able to approve the first tranche of them, the 5 plus the 2. So there isn't a financial risk because we have built that element already into the medium-term financial plan. But we do want the detailed specifications to come through from the strategy. Whatever happens, they need those engines.
In simplistic terms, our hope and ambition is that we will deliver a programme that sees the updating of the whole fleet over a number of years. We have determined this is I'm not say risk-free because nothing is ever free. It's extremely low risk, and I'm quite content with that risk. We actually expect that there will be more announcements that we will make on this front, but this is all I feel comfortable and prudent to do at this moment in time. You know, we're only 6 or 7 months into the governance change from a financial point of view. Whilst good progress has been made, I just want to make sure that if there are our reserves to make sure that we are sensible and sure. We're also doing some work around community community infrastructure lever, section 106. I couldn't get them out of my mouth at the moment. To make sure that we also leverage revenue opportunities, if you like, and we're also looking to see what we can do outside of our statutory thing to what we can do to generate income that would enable further investment in the service. So we're looking at things that we can do to make sure that we can make it even more stable. I think it's not unfair to say, and even my very, very sensible and cautious and prudent head of finance is we are pleased with the progress that we have made. We're probably in advance of where we expected to be at this moment in time, which is why we're able to kind of make these decisions. This year was really all about fix the boat, make sure that we stopped it from sinking, that were no kind of holes in it. We have done we are now going through, if you like, every single contract to actually also make sure that we understand all of our future liabilities, because some things I mentioned, the choppiness of money, sometimes things have been procured on the basis of 3 years to ensure that we don't suddenly find ourselves with an extra one. So I'm content and happy. I hope to have more good news for you, but at this moment in time, that's all the good news I'm prepared to share, if that makes sense.
Well, it's good to have good news for a change, and I think with the unitary it might be an opportunity to look at things like Section 106, because I know certainly from one authority that fire has sometimes, not got the benefit of that Section 106, depending on what policies there are, and I think it's an opportunity for the unitaries to make those policies robust, and so that when money is needed for new fire services, that it is possible to get that from new developments. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I mean, I'm delighted to say I think the agreement's now all been signed, so I will say £500,000 worth of Section 106 money did transfer over at the time of the governance transfer, which was fires, which is lovely, and it's very welcome because that will help towards funding some of those capital investments and other areas that in the medium-term plan I assumed that we might actually have to borrow for them. So it's a slightly better position. We're also looking at those arrangements moving forward about how we do get fire and policing both at the table to make sure their voice is heard and their opportunities are put forward. So thank you, Chair.
And that's, again, is it speculation? Obviously, I don't like to add any cost to my office that I can, but actually, and we'll probably be in purple, but actually making sure there's a resource to make sure that, the emergency services get their fair share from developers of all of these new houses are built is only as sensible and prudent to make sure that we do. You've got hydrants that kind of need installing. There should be, if you're building the equivalent of a new town as they are in some places, that needs fire provision. So actually stations, so we need to make sure we've got those. So we're actually making sure that we investment, and all of this is about making sure that's fit for purpose for the future, and fundamentally genuinely means that we can have a safer Northamptonshire.
Just a quick one. Well, first of all, congratulations. I think once you strip out the Section 31 being higher than expected, numbers are pretty much bang on budget, which is a good thing. Just a bit of clarity on that forecast underspend then. If we're at the end of the year with that underspend, can we transfer that into reserves? We don't have to give it back, do we?
Oh, it can go into fire reserves. And the other thing I did just want to highlight, although if we take out the business rates in the Section 31, it looks like we're bang on budget, we've actually also identified some costs that are built in the forecast for condition surveys of all of the properties, to buy back cars that have come to the end of their lease. So we've put in about £150,000 worth of extra costs in there as well. So it is quite a positive position at this point, but we're not complacent. We haven't had a full year. We don't know what we don't know, so we're still finding out as we work through. But we would put it in reserves, unless the Chief Fire Officer and the Commissioner had some areas they wish to invest it in, like perhaps some of the operational equipment that's been highlighted, or some other areas.
I'm glad you asked that question, because it is an important one. One of the philosophies that I've said always, particularly from policing and now from if somebody underspends, we won't penalise that. I mean, the joy is, it'll come back and in reserve, but actually if you haven't, one of my challenges to Nikki, rather than you just blow your budget in a year, I want you to do it right. So if it takes a little bit longer, I won't take it away from you, I'll give it back. And the same with the force, because that then also means that I'm very keen to, and I've always been very keen to avoid, which not being from the public sector, seems to be a public sector problem, that expenditure that goes on between January and March, because, oh my God, if I don't spend it, they won't give me any more. Then we needed to send a message that says, we won't penalise you for that. You can have it back and you can carry it forward, because then you're more likely to keep it back. And actually, you can see particularly in the fire service, they're very strong in making sure that's the case. And like I said, it will go in reserves, but all of that money will go back into fire.
I think Winston was next. Yep.
Sorry, Chair. Very, very quickly, Commissioner, we talked about the fire engines we're getting. Will they be fully equipped with the latest bits of quick kit?
Absolutely, yes. And like I said, at the same time, we will be making sure that the equipment on the other fire engines will be updated to make sure that we are, we need a state-of-the-art fire service. One of my objectives here in this, might seem like a long time, short time while I'm in this role, is to lay a foundation. My objective has always been that people look back and God, they made some sensible decisions that laid the foundation for stability for the future. And so actually making sure that not only we get them, and that doesn't mean buying stuff because we can, it's actually saying that at the timely and safe bit that we replace some of those equipment. And also if there's the opportunity to innovate, you've been involved when they got involved with kind of Cobra, was ahead of its time. Are there other things that we can kind of do? I wouldn't have thought, like I said, that there was any technological innovation over water, but actually there is. It's like I said, there's some stuff that they used recently at one of the incidents. I think it was the Kettering one or the Wellingborough one, which actually, like I said, makes water wetter, because actually it breaks down the molecular structure of the water and the surface tension. That means it puts stuff there. We want to be doing that because actually that drives efficiencies, money savings, that delivers a kind of a better service. But absolutely, no, we won't have engines with nothing on them, if you like. Okay. And the nice thing is, of course, our old ones we will still be using in conjunction with cadets, training vehicles and those sorts of things. Okay. And they, for everyone's reassurance, no one's asked me, We continue to move our fleet around. So obviously something like if I use the Mounts and Mere Way, then of course those engines get a lot more use than say one out in Brackley, for instance. So there is a rotational bit to make sure that we also are maximising that we've not got, if you like, an older knackered one at our busiest station and a brand new parked away over there. So also just being smart about the utilisation of the fleet. And when I come forward with some of the stuff on purple, is also actually can we make sure that we're leveraging, we currently service our vehicles in two different parts of the county. It's good that they're both done in the county. Wouldn't it make a lot more sense if we could do them in the same place? Even fire cars and police cars, they all tend to be Vauxhalls. So actually, is there some things we can do to make sure serviced in the same place?
Martin, I think you had.
Thanks, Chairman. And you know, mention has been made of Section 106, but councils, in my opinion, also need to consider investing to safeguard residents. And I'd like to thank Darren for provided written support for our plans to install targeted sprinklers worth around £400,000 in the refurbished multi-storey car park in Wellingborough, because you know, that will actually safeguard shoppers, residents, and also I'm sure it will be hugely supported by the fire service. But please tell me that we're not going to carry out a consultation on naming our brand new fire fleet in the same way as highways are doing with their gritting fleet.
I'm not sure that we wish to see any of us name our fire engines Boaty McBoatface or something, are we? So, but actually, until you thought that, I hadn't thought about, we might get some young kids involved or something of schools, but I don't think we'll get too carried away with it.
I think, Anita, you had.
Just a quick question on the commercial aspect. You said that the commercial budget reflects that income is unlikely to be achieved. What was the reason for that?
I can get you more detail on all of the reasons, but this budget is very much offering training courses and doing them abroad and getting the income in for those. They have just delivered less of those. They've been much more challenged in terms of staffing over the last few months. They're now getting back up to the appropriate staffing levels, but they just didn't have the amount of staff to do that. But we are looking at that area moving forward. If I've stolen your thunder.
Good to say the same. You will be pleased to know that actually, as part of that investment, we will be looking at a commercialisation strategy that say if there's some opportunity that the service used to earn money out of doing COBRA training for other services. We have a facility at Chelveston that we're kind of extending. It may be that can be utilised by other people. Other things that we could do that would generate income that would enable us, with the sole objective of any money we go that goes back into the service to provide better quality for the people of Northamptonshire.
I'm glad you said that, because I've always thought that it was an opportunity, and obviously we need the bodies to do it, and with the extra manpower, woman power, then we, you know, ought to be able to do that. Is that everyone happy to agree that report? And okay, move on. Okay, so next item, we welcome back.
Will I introduce it, Madam Chairman? I don't want to be presumptive, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Name sort of jumped out for a minute.
Madam Chairman, as panel members will know, the Joint Independent Audit Committee, JIAC, supports me and the Chief Constable and statutory officers in ensuring that effective governance arrangements are in place and functioning efficiently and effectively. The committee plays a vital role in helping me to hold the Chief Constable to account, as well as providing critical oversight of the work of the OFPCC. By bringing the Joint Audit's annual report to the Police and Fire and Crime Panel, it helps to bring together the assurances of our processes with the scrutiny of the decisions to increase transparency. The chairman of the committee, the wonderful Mr. John Beckerleg, is now present their annual report to you and answer any questions you have. More than happy to hand over to you, John.
Thank you, and thank you to the Chair and to the committee for the opportunity to address you. It is really helpful to me to share the work of the committee, also helpful to me to listen to the debate of the committee, and I'm hoping by the end of this, what I hope will be a short presentation, you'll also give me some feedback. In terms of the work of the committee, I'm slightly apologetic about the length of the report, so I'm going to try and compensate by doing a short introduction, and you can follow it with questions if you will. Last year we revised the terms of reference to the committee, you may remember, to accommodate the transfer of the governance of fire. This year there have been very small changes, but only very small changes to the terms of reference, so they are broadly unchanged. And to summarise an awful lot of the work of the committee, we've undertaken the sort of, quotes, normal work that you'd expect from an audit committee during the year. So such areas as keeping an oversight of the internal and external audit work, the risk work, and the review of the annual accounts. And on the basis of that, I think it's fair to say on behalf of the committee that we can offer a significant assurance in terms of the way that the governance arrangements are operating. Last year, you may recall, I set out the objectives for the committee, and in Appendix 2 to the report, I've identified the progress against those areas. There are a number that we've completed, but also a number that we have carried forward, and some of those are for good reasons, and reasons which I think, in fairness, you've already touched on this afternoon. I think I simply want to draw out a small number of areas to highlight, really. The first one is in respect of fire governance, and I'd have to say the audit committee was well briefed in terms of the arrangements and the transfer arrangements as they went through, including a workshop on the subject. We appreciated that, and I think we are very appreciative of the work that had gone on in terms of that transfer, which seemed to happen from our perspective very smoothly. Looking forward, I think there are three areas, and you've actually indirectly touched on these already in some of your debate. One is around building the resilience, the financial sustainability of fire going forward, and I know there are plans in terms of the way in which the reserves are due to be brought back into it to a sort of sensible level, if I can describe it like that. And that's an area we will continue to have interest in, but as you will have gathered from the previous item, I think we are making progress in that area. Second topic, and again you've touched on this, is the recommendations from the HMIC FRS around fire, particularly around the staffing levels, the availability levels, and the training that needs to happen. And I think those are happening, and we will keep in touch with those over the year. And finally, and probably you haven't mentioned this one in relation to fire, just developing the sort of full governance framework. You'll recall that as a committee we've worked quite hard to gain assurance about the governance framework within police, and we want to try and do the same thing with fire. That's a relatively new organisation in the sense of being freestanding, so it's perfectly understandable that not all the plans are in place and progress is being made, but we will want to continue to monitor that. Helen's very ably stole most of my thunder around the annual accounts. I don't know why I came really this afternoon, no. The annual accounts, it's definitely an unusual year, and I pay all credit to the finance team in terms of their contribution to this process, in terms of getting the statutory accounts prepared and available within the requisite timeline. I think the unusual bit is the point you've touched on in terms of the role of the external auditor here, and I think I'm allowed to say this. I think you were quite kind and Helen was quite gentle in terms of the view of external audit. It is unique in my experience not to have external auditors complete the external audit in the timescale, and for it to have dragged on in the way that it has, I think is personally inexcusable, but your officers were too polite to say that. I've certainly been trying to encourage us to raise this formally and to express a view in terms of the position going forward, which is the assurance you were seeking. Slightly controversially, I'm out of step, I think, with some of the officers around looking actually for a fee reduction rather than a fee increase for this process, because I think they significantly let you down in terms of public accountability. That said, I'm hopeful. My report says that we were due the update from the auditors at the end of September. That hasn't, or the report on the audit at the end of September. That hasn't happened. But we will continue to press to get these resolved. And I'm as confident as I can be that they will receive an unqualified audit report at the end of this process. But I just think it's too long, if I'm a member of the public, to expect to wait to see the accounts formalised. The third area I just want to mention is a familiar topic to all of us, and it's been touched on again this afternoon, the multi-force shared service. A slight feeling of deja vu, I can mention that, because I slightly stuck my neck out last year expressing concerns about this service. The Commissioner and the police have worked hard in terms of trying to secure better governance, to progress the implementation plan of the upgrade, and to try and improve the service quality level. But I think there's still more to be done, and I'm really pleased at the moment there are proposals coming together, at least to explore options. I would say that it's not a straightforward thing in terms of moving support services. So whilst I might be uncomfortable with the level of service you're currently getting, I think it needs careful consideration before you decide to leap in any other direction, and I just offer that from personal pain in terms of the arrangements. One small item in the report which I've mentioned but which I'm not an expert enough to be able to develop very far is around concerns that came from internal audit around seized property. And it's an area that the Audit Committee will want to, and indeed is coming back to in November. I know it's not a problem that's unique to Northamptonshire, but it is an area that I just want to explore and the committee wants to explore in more detail and to understand. So in conclusion, Chair, just two points from me. In Appendix 3, I've set out the objectives for the year, and some of those are, as I've mentioned, carried forward from the previous year, but they are focused in some of the areas of concern I've just mentioned. We're also committed, and rightly so, to a review of our own effectiveness as an audit committee. So I would welcome feedback both on our objectives for the coming year, but also in terms of any perceptions you may have about the audit committee, or indeed how I find a way in which I can get a review undertaken which is sufficiently challenging of what we do to make sure it adds value to what is now the three organisations. Very happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think it gives us a lot of comfort that you are looking in detail at some areas that we might only see a brief overview of. And one of those, to my mind, was actually flagged up by the Commissioner, and that was IT, and that you looked into that in some detail and seem to be assured on it. So I don't know whether you'd like to sort of expand on that at all.
Thank you, Chair. It was an area that we were interested in, and I know the Commissioner was interested. We were particularly wanting to ensure that there was a clear strategy in terms of the way in which IT was being developed. And we had a workshop presentation from the force around IT. That gave us a degree of assurance, but also identified just how complex the IT landscape is within police in terms of the number of different pieces of technology and so on that there is. And I think the Commissioner earlier on was, perhaps I think I heard this right, was offering a presentation around IT back to the panel. And if you can, I suggest you take up that offer because it was very informative. As I say, gave us some assurance, but also gave me an appreciation of just how difficult some of this is to manage a whole series of concurrent projects, really. Not helped by some of the, I was about to say almost lack of movement, the slow progress on some of the nationwide IT projects, and not least the emergency services network.
Thank you very much. And the other point that I wanted to pick up in your report, you mentioned about the HR policies and that took taken much longer than expected. Are you now happy that that's...
Chair, I am now happy or content. One or the other. I'm allowed to be content. It did take a long time, and I think we will still review those as part of the review of the overall governance framework, because I think it's important that you have them in place. Just a degree of frustration in terms of the length of time that perhaps took.
Mr. Mahaffey.
Actually, a couple of quick questions on your terms of reference. I'm comparing this to what I'm used to in the private sector. I have very little engagement with the public sector. How are the committees actually appointed? being appointed by being an independent committee, being appointed by the Commissioner, Chief Constable and Chief Fire Officer, it did look a little odd.
Yes, I mean, I think I am independent of all of those three organisations. I do have an interest in all three of the organisations in the sense of the emergency service is an area that's fascinated me for some time. In terms of the appointment, my appointment was through an interview process managed partly by members of the audit committee who of themselves were independent at that stage, but also by sort of officers within the Commissioner's office. And I can speak as a convert. I am very committed to the value of independent members, and I don't say that just because it's me. I've seen the contribution that independent members can make in terms of challenge and scrutiny, and so I'm very supportive of the model. You may not be, but I am. Sorry.
Yeah, what I used to saying is that the executive management wouldn't be choosing the members of the audit committees. It would be people in a non-executive role, whereas I was thinking certainly in the latter two, you'd definitely put them in the executive bucket, wouldn't you?
I think I would, but with an input from members of the committee. So we have tried to, I mean, I've certainly been involved in the recent appointments in terms of the audit committee members, and I didn't feel compromised in any sense in terms of making those appointments. So I think it's important that you've got that independent element in there. But ultimately, I am accountable to the two organisations. I'm not accountable to shareholders or something. So it's a slightly different accountability model, which perhaps raises its own challenges sometimes.
And then just final point, again, compared to what I'm used to seeing in the private sector, whistleblowing arrangements. That's something typically in the private sector would be included within the overview of the whistleblowing arrangements, typically be within the audit committee's terms of reference. Is that something that's been considered?
It is, and we've touched on this in the past as a committee, and we have a number of things in place. So, in terms of the overall governance framework that we've looked at and so on, we've tried to ensure there are appropriate aspects like whistleblowing, like the anti-fraud policy and so on. And we specifically are wanting to look in the year ahead around things like the anti-fraud policy, which will pick up whistleblowing as part of that anyway. So we will check that it's part of the governance framework, but I'm not sure if your point is perhaps it might benefit from being made more explicit, and I don't think that would cause us a difficulty.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'm just going to ask about the force management statement, which you say is not complete and there'll be further discussions about. I just wonder whether you wanted to make any comment on that.
Okay, this may have been a misunderstanding in my part at one point, but the requirement to produce a force management statement felt like a useful contribution to the governance of the force and a contribution in terms of the way in which the force was led in a strategic sense. And as such, it formed part of the governance framework and one that we wanted to look at. I think the difficulty in why we've carried this forward is the nature of the force management statement contains, as I understand it, a significant element of information which the force would prefer not to have circulated into our meetings are in public, into a public domain. So with the understanding at the moment is that the force is looking at the force management statement with a view to producing a version which will give assurance to the committee about the way the statement is prepared and its contribution to the organisation without exposing it to risk, because information that shouldn't get into the public domain is in the public domain, and that's the reason we're following it through. We've yet to see exactly how that fits, but I can gladly report on the next year.
Thank you very much. I think Steve wants.
Yeah, just to kind of pick up on your point, fundamentally the act that brings the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner into being is ultimately we are held to account on behalf of the public. You hold us, if you like, you hold me to account for how I'm holding to account the chief, I'll get it right way around, to the chief constable. But ultimately, every 4 years we're on that. So I think actually, and I would just sort of say, and obviously I would like this, and I would highlight it because John doesn't give praise lightly, do you, John? For anyone who kind of knows him. So in he has been, and the panel, the committee has been of great benefit to me, and I'm not saying they were even more benefit to me at my earliest times in office, and it'd be very easy to dismiss the bit that says, has entered a more stable period as a result of the existence of clearer governance arrangements and processes than earlier years of the PCC. My God, how that understates the work that has been done and what we'd found. You know, that the independent assurance, if you like, is to me and to the Chief Constable. We've extended that in our openness and transparency to yourself, because the challenge you've got is I've tried to make sure all the way through my time in office, which sadly might be coming to an end in a not too distant future, we shall see, where you could never kind of go, bloody hell, he never told us that, if you know what I mean. So I hope that I would probably just draw you to that conclusion. John wouldn't say that lightly. We made more great progress. Doesn't mean that there won't be more stuff that we continue to need to do as we particularly kind of move forward with these organisations.
I would like to thank you very much for your report and for your assurance to this panel. And it's quite useful that you hear what we're discussing and vice versa, I think, so that we've got that crossover, but from a perhaps different point of view. But it's very reassuring that you're looking into certain things in perhaps a little bit more detail than we're able to. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you for your report. Okay, I think that's almost the last item. The work programme. James, would you like to take us through it?
Thank you, Chair. This particular version of the report serves two purposes. The standard one, which is obviously to give the panel, as at each of its meetings, an overview of its work programme, setting out the items that it's identified that it wants to scrutinise, in addition to the business it's statutorily required to carry out. So the latest version of that is pages 81 and 82. Clearly this is a living document. There is scope to add, amend and remove to help ensure that the panel's capacity is directed most effectively towards carrying out its task. The specific aspect of this version of the work programme report relates to the panel's future participation in the National Association of Police and Crime Panels. This is a relatively new body that's been developed by representatives from different panels over recent years. The terms of reference are set out at the end of page 77, top of page 78. And indeed, Councillor Mercer, as chairman of this panel, has been quite well involved in working up the National Association, getting it to the point it's at. The panel has previously expressed a desire to be involved. It's useful. That was over a year ago now, so it's useful to bring this back to the panel to enable you to give a view about how you wish to proceed. A particular aspect of that is the latest understood position is that the Home Office do not see the payment of any subscription or similar costs towards participating in a national association as something that could be funded from the grant funding that they provide to panel host authorities to support the operation of police and crime panels. So to divide this into two elements, the panel's being asked to give a view on the continued participation in the National Association in principle, and then also any view that you wish to give about how we might go about seeking the resources to support that, if it is the case that the grant funding can't be used. So So the standard work programme report, an opportunity for the panel to take stock of its existing plans and to amend those as necessary, and then the specific issue around future participation in the National Association of Police and Crime Panels. I hope the report's reasonably clear, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions that panel members may wish to raise.
Thank you very much. I think perhaps if we will leave the National Association aside for the moment and just deal with the work programme to start with, and then we'll go on to that afterwards, if that's all right. Did anyone got any thoughts on, Robert, you had?
So the best practice guidance that was shared with us a few months ago, what are we doing to take that forward? Just looking through it, I can see there's elements in there where we don't align. Now, I don't personally think we should just blindly align, but at least there are prompts for thought and further discussion on whether there's changes we could and should make as to how we operate.
It could well be that we perhaps ought to put that on an agenda and to actually bring that forward. And, you know, because when I think we had it before, it was quite raw. We'd only just received it, and we haven't really sort of taken that on board or seen whether we need to take any view on changes that we might need to make. So I think that might be useful to add on to perhaps the next agenda, if that's possible. We'll see, you know, when we look at that agenda, if there are any other items we need to change on that. Richard, I saw your hand.
Yes, on the 12th of December, we've got the Peel inspections to look at. It'd be useful to get a consensus here. You know, we can do the work. You know, I've gone through and started cross-reference the 2018-19 Peel with the previous one, and I'm just not too sure on how much forward it takes us, because what we're going to have is we're going to have a load of areas. Some areas have actually got worse. Some areas are still in improvement. We've heard the Commissioner quite clearly tell us that it's not acceptable that he is holding the Chief Constable and the force to account, and he didn't say that he would go to the guillotine, but he did say he'd eat a hat if the next performance. So I'm not too sure whether going over the same ground will actually take us any further with regard to the debate, with regard to our residents. Some people may disagree. I'd be interested to hear your opinions, and I would propose that we've aired it today. I thought we've had some candid comments, and we've had some reassurance whether in fact we need to carry it forward to December. I'm interested to have the views of my colleagues.
I'd be interested to hear everyone's views, but I think because we actually discussed this at the beginning, but it has come up quite strongly during this meeting. And so, as Richard said, I'm not sure we gain anything from having that on that agenda. You know, listen to other people, though. And anyone else like to comment on that?
Okay, yeah, personally I think, you know, it's an important issue that we've got to think about going forward, and we've got to look at it every opportunity we can. I'm quite happy to leave it on there and see what improvements Stephen can come back with and say, or the Chief Constable, you know, an element of progress on where they are, and even an element of where they're not making progress. So I'm quite happy for it to stay on there, and I think, you know, we can't, you know, vet it enough to make sure that it's working going forward.
I just wonder whether that might be in performance updates anyway, since
it could well be, but yeah.
If we are going to look at the Peel, then surely then we have got to pick up on those key performance indicators at that meeting to see what improvement on the top of the 8 months that is gone, what improvement has been made, then we will be in a better position. I think we definitely should talk about it, because from now to December, we are in October, so November, December, 2 months, well, some more achievement could have been made. And so we need to have a look.
Sorry.
So I think from the sound of it, it won't be correct to describe if there is an item on the agenda of the 12th of December, it would no longer be correct to describe it as the outcomes of HMICFR. Difficult to say again. HMICFRS inspections. It would be talking about the progress in improving performance. I think the questions that arise from that include, does that need to be a separate agenda item, or would it be picked up as part of the Commissioner's standard update report? The panel would obviously need to reflect the distinction between its remit for holding the Commissioner to account and the Commissioner's remit for holding the panel to account. And a more general point, I think I'm very, very happy to hear the suggestion that something might be taken out of the work programme or rescheduled within the work programme, because you do only have finite resources, and which is fundamentally your time and expertise, and it is important for that to be deployed in the best way. Quite agree with Mrs. Shields' point as well about essentially, if the panel's going to do something, what's the focus of that going to be? What's the intended outcome? Because I'm particularly talking about the meeting deep into December, dare I say it as well. It's important that you think about what you want to achieve, what the focus is for something, and how best that is delivered, rather than, yes, it's on there, it has to stay on there, it can't be changed or moved or taken off altogether.
Stephen, would you like to?
Try to proffer and help support. Ultimately, your agenda is your agenda, but you're holding me to account on how I hold the Chief Constable account. I will not be having a material update from a Chief Constable in December on performance. You will have seen, we will launch on Monday our new model. It will not be enough time for material to have changed. What will happen is we will meet with Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary in the January timeframe. I think I've got meetings January at the end of January. It would be more timely for me to give you some performance information as part of my quarterly report in December, and I can give you some insights of what we've shared with HMIC as part of my holding the Chief Constable account at the end of January, and probably so I think we've got one beginning of February or something like that. So I think I can give you more reassurance, whereas actually you're probably going to ask me a lot of questions in December, and I'm going to go, I've not asked the Chief Constable. You've got a new Chief Constable, and he's still doing. I have to give him the time and the scrutiny, and be aware of the scrutiny there, that to make sure he's delivering. But considering you've got, if essentially the whole thing that comes into effect next week doesn't have everybody filling in all of those posts. Some stuff's going to be retained, like response isn't moving into the regional, probably into the territorial model till the back end of the year. So there's a bunch of bits to going on. But quarterly, there are, what would be appropriate is for me at the December one to give you an update, not on the whole of the report, but some performance data and probably some update on the causes for concern, because those are the most critical elements of it that you should quite rightly say, have you got assurance from the Chief Constable on the serious cause for concern? Like I said, it's your agenda. What would probably be beneficial is the complaints legislation is likely to be laid in Parliament to come into effect in February. I think looking at it, you have complaints in February, it may be, or March, it may be beneficial for us to bring that forward, because, for instance, at the moment, we're recruiting to those roles, so actually we could give you a more material. It's your agenda, but I'm just saying that would be more helpful and timely for you, because I'd give you more informed on the HMIC, and if you swap the two around, if that makes sense. But I would cover some of that in the performance stuff, and I take that on board, that you need to know that as part of some of the suggestions that were quite rightly made about our performance data.
And in addition, Chair, taking a light touch on something at one point doesn't preclude you from then following it up in more depth or with more focus at a later point. So having an update around improvement areas in the standard update report to the December meeting, for the sake of argument, doesn't preclude the panel from having a discussion that produces a conclusion, well, we would like to look at this again, or we would like to look at a particular aspect. It's about using the combination of all of the different working methods available to you in the right way at the right time. It's a consideration that applies to scrutiny generally, whether that's an overview and scrutiny committee at a council or an equivalent function elsewhere. You have a range of different working methods available to you. It's about using those in the best combination.
Okay, so it's, if we take out that as a separate item, whilst understanding that the one that says performance updates will give us any causes of concern, then, yeah, sort of things to do with the salient points of that. Was there something? There was another item that we were going to add into the agenda. What was?
Well, it was potentially an item on the policeman and fire governance guidance.
Yeah, the guidance.
And how the panel responds to that, takes that on board. And yeah. It's absolutely been a characteristic of the panel's work virtually throughout its life that it's not just scrutinised the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, it's scrutinised itself and used various different approaches to monitor its own effectiveness and take action to change the way it works, to develop the way it works where necessary. Okay. This may well be a case.
Everyone happy with that then? Okay.
Madam Chairman,
and what about complaints?
At the risk of influencing your agenda, you may also consider, I would hope, well, let's put it this way, if you didn't give me it as a separate agenda item, I'll just put it in my quarterly report, but I would hope to give you an update on the estates and the coming together around Purple, which we discussed earlier, around the combined Batuta, which I think, given we'll be coming up to an annual, you'll probably want at that time.
As you mentioned that earlier on, and I think that may come in with another item, but I think, certainly the Purple, and do we perhaps bring forward the complaints, as Stephen suggested, that might be a timely point, okay? Right, so just one final item, as we were just saying about the National Association. I have found it very useful to compare with other panels, both at the conferences, working together with the National Association. I've been on the executive for the last year. I put myself forward for this year. And I found it very useful because you get other ideas from these other people and they say, well, don't you do that way, or do you do that way? The differences between PFCCs or PCCs is quite stark as well. So is everyone generally supportive of actually sort of continuing to do that? Richard, to you?
Yeah. I think it's an old record for me. What benefit have we had? You talked about all these interesting things, but how have they influenced us at all? Here, how has it influenced the work we do here, scrutinising the Commissioner, working with the residents of Northampton? I've always been suspicious of these groups. We tend to go there for a talking shop, but the outcomes, what are the outcomes, substantial outcomes that is improving what we're doing? And unless we can list that and articulate that, then it's just £500 which has been wasted. But that's always been my opinion, and I raise it again. But I know I'm not in tune with the rest of the panel on that one.
We're leaving the money side out of it, yeah.
I'm going to contradict you here, Richard. Absolutely. The whole purpose, I've said it before and I'll say it again, the whole purpose of that association is that you are learning from mistakes that you may have taken, or solution to problems that is being presented, and they are very concrete and material. Examples are given, and it's thought-provoking because it provides you with more understanding of some other problems and solutions you have not considered.
We need to list exactly what they are.
Fine.
What we learned.
Well, fine. The chair will be able to give you all the paperwork,
I just want a list of all the things that we've actually as an outcome.
She will. I mean, there has been hunting development.
Hundreds.
I didn't say 100.
All right.
Hunting.
All right.
Example of problem that has been solved. And I think if you want the hard copy, I'm pretty sure that the chair will be able to give it to you, because we receive a pack before and after. We were doing workshop to actually say, this is a problem that we have. Oh, this is not a problem, this is a solution. I think you were there as well. I don't know if you were part of the workshop, but I'll be happy to me, I see this as a benchmarking exercise, comparing yourself as Northampton to, say, Derby, Nottingham, or any other forces. It's about looking, for instance, Glasgow has had terrible problem with crime and everything. They have solved the problem, and they tell you how. Is that not worthwhile to listen?
They will serve.
Could I just say I agree with both? So I think absolutely in principle, we should do this and we should get benefit from it. But Richard's quite right. If you're somebody who's not personally there and you're not seeing something coming back concrete, then it's a very fair point. So I think there is probably a point there to be. I'm sure we can be more proactive in using the outputs of these things and demonstrably using the outputs of these things, Chair.
I agree. I'm probably a bit remiss, but we always have such long agendas, it's difficult to sort of bring back detail. But I think it would be quite useful to do a report, and people can read it in their own time, really, rather than sort of lengthy discussions. But I do find, just on a personal note, that, if there's an issue to do with, I don't know, complaints or, the way other people are resolving things and that sort of thing, that I get an opportunity to discuss it personally. It might be that you say, oh, well, okay, I don't need to worry about that then, and so it stops you going down a line that would waste your time, rather than something you actually positively do. But I found it useful. Martin?
I don't agree with talking shops by any means, but Richard now is going to be the leader of Daventry, and you're going to get involved with district council networks and obviously working with East Midlands Council, and I've always find those extremely useful. But of course, it's then your responsibility to contribute what you learn at those to your group. I do it to my group, and of course the chairman needs to communicate what she has found to us. I don't see a problem with that at all, and I personally think it's a good step forward.
I think that's a fair challenge, and that's why it's debate, and I always lose the debate every year. But for me, the proof is in the pudding. Not all panels have signed up to it. It's not really recognised as an influential body with government. It's not like a professional organisation, and for me, it's just the whole. Maybe I'm dying in a ditch over an ideology that just winds me up. But I love you all, and I know we're staying in. So God bless you.
Evidence, so we should say to ourselves.
Sorry, James has got a comment. Sorry, we haven't quite finished yet. James.
So, I think the majority view seems to be that the panel should pursue its involvement in this. That raises the question of how to meet the cost if the position is that can't be funded from the Home Office Police and Crime Panel grant. The panel's position then may be to go back to the chair of the National Association and say, we would like to be involved, but in the current situation we can't be, because we're not in the position to meet a subscription cost. An alternative option for the panel would be to approach each of the local authorities in Northamptonshire and, as is provided for in the panel's arrangement, and say, there is a thing here, there is an action here we would like to take, but that is subject to the local authorities putting their hand in the pocket, essentially. But that I think is the reality of the situation that we're in. Or potentially the panel, perhaps in conjunction with other police and crime panels, could contact the Home Office and say, we think there's a case for you considering your position on the use of the Home Office grant.
Sorry, if I can come in there. We've bashed our head against a brick wall with this Home Office grant, and I have got a meeting next week of the executive of this association, and we're going to try and rethink this policy, because, as Richard said, if we're only half of the associations, we've got a lot less sort of leverage or clout. Now, the reason the Home Office won't give us this allowance is because they don't want us to lobby them, okay? And in the terms of reference, it didn't say lobby, but of course the Home Office are not convinced about that. So the idea is to sort of rethink this money, and so I think if we could perhaps park this for the moment, because we need to consider as an association, I'm talking with the association hat on that, what we would do with that money and, you know, what we really need it for. So it's all up for discussion at the moment, and then the AGM follows in November, and it will be discussed then. So I think perhaps if we just park that idea for the moment until that's resolved, till it's discussed and thought out.
If I remember, the Home Office, that is, with the association, we were debating finance about submitting the grant, yeah? And they were making a point into the presentation that particularly Northampton was not given the full maximum of the grant that they were able to get. Now they were saying that, for instance, anything to do with training, they would actually give the money. Well, it's an understanding, interpretation. Is it not, would you say, this kind of gathering for benchmarking, for finding solution, for is it not training under the category of training?
That was the thought line at one point, but we felt that to put £500 down against training might be a bit obvious.
I think your suggestion to actually park it till in the new year makes absolute sense, especially, you know, as we're going through local government reform, and you know, we could collect some money from each council, we probably wouldn't get it from Daventry, but perhaps the timing's not right, so let's just park this one. It's not a huge amount of money.
If that's all right, James, I think, you know, we want to have a voice, or at least to talk everyone together so that we get everyone together, and that's something, you know, I'm hoping that will be resolved in the fairly near future.
So the panel is not making a commitment either way on this until the situation's clarified. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Oh, sorry, we have another agenda item. Beg your pardon. Okay, no, there's another item. Right, so we'll finish on that one. Complaints monitoring report, I'll give that to James.
Thank you, Chair. This is the report that comes to the panel every 6 months to give it an update on the operation of the panel's complaints function. I should emphasise it's not with a view to getting into the detail of individual complaints, but to monitor the overall operation of the arrangements that the panel has set in place to carry out its statutory responsibility in this area. So the current position is as set out in paragraph 2.4, which is there is one complaint that needs to be dealt with via the informal resolution process carried out by the panel's complaints subcommittee. A meeting of the complaints subcommittee will be convened as soon as possible to do that, and arrangements for that are being made. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, in relation to the report.
I think we've probably just need to note that.
Just a quick one. So is that one complaint made or one complaint that's gone above a threshold in the 6 months?
It's one complaint in total. I mean,
How can you do your job for 6 months and only have one person complain about you? That's is this a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it compares favourably, if I could say, with other areas. If that's all, I'd like to thank everybody for their attention, and we're still quiet.